Imagine standing at the edge of a city so vast, so densely alive with human commerce and human thought, that the very ground beneath your feet hums with it. The year is 1324. The air smells of tanned leather, of incense carried on the harmattan wind, of roasting meat and river clay, still warm from the afternoon sun. Around you, tens of thousands of people move through streets laid out with a precision that would shame half the capitals of the medieval world. Merchants argue in a dozen languages. Scholars walk with ink-stained hands and downcast eyes, lost in problems of theology and mathematics that Europe will not wrestle with for another century. Gold, not as jewelry, not as decoration, but as a raw, unprocessed geological fact, moves through this city in quantities so obscene that the men carrying it barely glance down. This is Niani, the heart of the Mali Empire. And the man at the center of it all is about to do something that will shake the foundations of 3 continents. His name is Mansa Musa, and he is leaving. Not fleeing, not retreating. He is leaving on a pilgrimage, a Hajj to Mecca, and he is taking with him an entourage so enormous, so staggeringly wealthy, that historians 1,000 years later will still argue about whether the numbers can possibly be correct. 60,000 men travel with him, 12,000 servants, 80 camels, each carrying between 300 and 400 pounds of pure gold dust. A personal retinue of 500 slaves, each holding a golden staff weighing 6 pounds. His wives travel with him, thousands of them by some accounts, accompanied by their own servants and their own attendants and their own clouds of perfume and silk. He crosses the Sahara and the desert. That ancient, indifferent killer does not stop him. Nothing stops him. When he reaches Cairo, the city that considers itself the jewel of the Islamic world, something unprecedented happens. The markets collapse. The value of gold, which Egypt's economy has rested on like a man rests on bone, simply disintegrates. Mansa Musa moves through the city distributing gifts so liberally to mosques, to scholars, to the poor, to the simply curious, that the gold markets of Cairo, Medina, and Mecca will not recover for 12 years. 12 years. A single man's generosity so overwhelming that it deranges the Mediterranean economy for more than a decade. And here is where the story really begins. Because when you ask most people today what they know about ancient Africa, what they were taught in school, what they absorbed from books and films and maps and museum exhibits, the answer is almost always the same. Egypt. Maybe some vague mention of Timbuktu as a phrase, meaning somewhere impossibly far away. Perhaps, if you are lucky, a half sentence about the trans-Saharan trade, and that gap, that echoing, deliberate silence, is exactly what this story is about. Stay with me. Because what we are about to uncover is not simply impressive. It is not simply a corrective to a historical oversight. What we are about to walk through together is a reckoning with one of the most consequential omissions in the way the modern world understands itself. If you have ever wondered why the history you learned felt somehow incomplete, like a map with entire continents missing, then keep watching. Because we are about to fill in the blank spaces. And the truth is far more extraordinary, far more human, and far more disturbing than anything your textbook was willing to tell you. Let us begin, not where most documentaries begin, with dates and dynasties and the dry architecture of political succession. Let us begin instead in the dirt, in the actual ground of West Africa, roughly 3,000 years before Mansa Musa ever set foot in Cairo. The Niger River Valley is wet in a way that changes you if you grow up beside it. The river is enormous, not merely wide but alive, in a way that demands a biological vocabulary. It floods seasonally with a generosity that the Nile, for all its famous fertility, can barely match. Fish move through it in quantities so vast that a man standing at the bank in the dry season can hear them before he sees them. Birds arrive in migrations so thick that the sky darkens, and in the rich black alluvial soil deposited by centuries of flooding, the people of this valley discover something that will define West African civilization for millennia. They discover that they can feed everyone. This sounds simple. It is not. The ability to produce reliable agricultural surplus, to grow more food than you eat, to store it, to trade it, to use the time it frees up for other things, is the single most important engine of complex civilization. Every great empire in human history rests on this foundation, and the civilizations of the West African Sahel discover it independently, ingeniously, in ways precisely adapted to their particular landscape. They cultivate millet and sorghum in the drier uplands. They fish the river with techniques of stunning sophistication. They keep cattle in systems of seasonal transhumance that allow them to exploit different ecological zones without exhausting any one of them. They smelt iron. And this is important. This is something the textbooks consistently understate. They smelt iron at a technological level that in some regions of sub-Saharan Africa predates the same development in Europe. Read that again. Iron smelting. The fundamental technology of the ancient world's military and agricultural revolutions. In parts of sub-Saharan Africa, this technology appears earlier than in Europe, not later, earlier. The implications of this are profound, and the resistance to accepting them has been considerable. But the archaeological evidence, accumulated over decades of work at sites in present-day Nigeria, Tanzania, and the Great Lakes region, is unambiguous. Africans were not recipients of iron technology diffused from elsewhere. In at least some regions, they were its independent inventors. With iron comes the capacity to clear land more efficiently, to build more permanent structures, to defend territory and to contest it. And with that contest comes the first great organizing principle of complex society, the state. The earliest major political entities to emerge in the West African Sahel are organized around a logic that will feel familiar if you understand any ancient economy: control of resources and control of roots. The first great empire of the Western Sudan is Ghana, not the modern nation, but the ancient state that occupied what is today southern Mauritania and western Mali, and which begins to consolidate power sometime around the 4th century of the Common Era. Ghana's genius is geographic. It sits precisely at the point where the gold-producing forests of the south meet the salt-producing Sahara of the north. Gold and salt. At this particular moment in human history, these two substances are so essential, so fiercely desired, that they trade, in some accounts, weight for weight. A pound of gold for a pound of salt. Because in the pre-refrigeration world, salt is not a condiment. Salt is survival itself. Without it, you cannot preserve meat. Without it, in the brutal heat of the Sahel, your body fails you in ways that are unpleasant to contemplate and swift in their consequences. Ghana does not produce the gold. It does not produce the salt. What it does, with a bureaucratic sophistication that would have impressed a Roman proconsul, is tax both. Every load of gold heading north through Ghana pays a duty. Every block of salt heading south pays a duty. The state accumulates wealth on a scale that stuns the Arab geographers who first document it in writing. Al-Bakri, writing in 1068, describes the court of the king of Ghana with a precision that makes you sit forward in your chair. The king, he tells us, adorns himself with gold necklaces and bracelets. He holds audiences in a pavilion surrounded by horses draped in gold cloth. 10 pages stand at his side, their shields and swords adorned with gold. Behind them are the sons of lesser kings, serving as hostages and courtiers, their hair braided with gold. Dogs guard the entrance to the pavilion, dogs of all things, wearing gold and silver collars and bells. When the king gives an audience, drums are beaten. His subjects prostrate themselves and throw dirt on their heads in a gesture of submission and respect. This is not a village chief. This is a monarch presiding over a state apparatus of genuine complexity, with a standing army, a professional bureaucracy, and a court culture that has had centuries to develop its rituals and its aesthetics. But here is what al-Bakri also tells us, and what is rarely quoted in the same breath. This king commands an army of 200,000 warriors. 200,000. This number is almost certainly exaggerated. Medieval Arab geographers were not rigorous statisticians, But even a fraction of that figure represents a military capacity that makes Ghana a genuine regional superpower. And the king uses it. Ghana's wealth rests not only on its tax revenues, but on its ability to project force, to protect the trade routes, to ensure that the caravans keep moving and the duties keep flowing. And the caravans do keep moving. Because the Sahara, which we instinctively imagine as a barrier, is in reality something else entirely, a road, or rather, a network of roads. And these roads are among the most important arteries of the ancient and medieval world. Consider what moves through them. Gold, moving north, ends up in the mints of Fatimid Egypt and Abbasid Baghdad, and eventually in the gold coinage of medieval Europe. Every gold coin struck in a European kingdom during the high medieval period traces its metal through a chain of trade and melting and restriking back ultimately to the mines of West Africa. The florins of Florence, the ducats of Venice, the money that finances the Italian Renaissance, that pays for Raphael and Michelangelo and Leonardo, has its ultimate origin in the mines and the trade networks of the very civilization your textbook failed to mention. Think about that the next time you stand in front of a painting in a museum. Think about where the money came from. Salt moves south through the same routes, along with copper and manufactured goods from North Africa and the Mediterranean world. Enslaved people move in multiple directions. This is a truth we must not flinch from, and we will return to it. But also free merchants, scholars, ambassadors, ideas, technologies, and books. The Sahara is not a wall. It is a highway, and the civilizations on either side of it are in constant, dynamic, creative conversation. Ghana eventually declines, destabilized by the Almoravid pressure from the north, by internal rebellions, by the slow desiccation of its agricultural hinterland. By the early 13th century, it is fragmented into smaller successor states, and out of the vacuum it leaves behind, something new begins to emerge, something larger, something that will, for a brief, astonishing period in the 14th century, become the largest empire on earth, the Mali Empire. The story of Mali's rise is, at its core, the story of a single man. His name is Sundiata Keita, and his story is one of the most remarkable in the entire canon of world history, known to every child in West Africa, the way that Achilles or King Arthur or Beowulf is known in their respective traditions, as a figure so powerful, so perfectly shaped by the needs of his moment, that history and mythology have wrapped around him like water around stone until you can no longer quite separate the two. What we know, or believe we know, is this. Sundiata is born into a royal family of the Mandinka people in the early 13th century. He is a sickly child, unable to walk, despised by his father's other wives, an object of mockery in a culture that prizes physical strength and martial prowess above almost everything else. His mother, Sogolon, is humiliated. They are marginalized at court, exiled when the old king dies, driven from place to place as the new rulers of the Mandinka consolidate their power under the domination of the Soso king Sumanguru Kante, a man who, in the oral tradition, is a figure of terrifying power, a sorcerer king who wears armor made of human skin and keeps the heads of his defeated enemies as musical instruments. This is where we must pause and sit with the darkness for a moment. Because Sumanguru Kante, whatever mythology has done to him, represents a historical reality, the predatory state, the ruler who imposes himself on surrounding peoples through a combination of military force, psychological terror, and the deliberate destruction of competing power centers. The heads as instruments detail may be symbolic or it may be literal. We cannot know with certainty, but what it gestures toward is a recognizable historical phenomenon, the use of ritualized violence as political communication, the deliberate theatrical degradation of the defeated as a message to the living. This kind of rule leaves marks on the people who survive it, marks in the body, in the psychology, in the songs that mothers sing to children in the dark. And it is into this atmosphere of humiliation and fear that Sundiata returns. By now, he is an adult. The legs that would not carry him as a child have apparently strengthened. He gathers allies from among the Mandinka clans and from neighboring peoples who have their own grievances against the Soso. The coalition he builds is a feat of diplomacy as much as of military strategy. And at the Battle of Kirina, around 1235, he defeats Sumanguru Kante decisively. The oral tradition says Sumanguru is struck by a special arrow tipped with a white rooster's spur, neutralizing his supernatural power, which is the tradition's way of saying that the moment of his military and political defeat was also the moment of his psychological unmasking. The terrifying sorcerer revealed in the end as merely a man who could be beaten. Sundiata goes on to establish the Mali Empire, and what he builds is not simply a conquest state. It is a constitutional order. The Gabara, the great assembly of clan and lineage representatives, is created to govern alongside the emperor, to hold him accountable, to represent the interests of the diverse peoples now living under Malian authority. This is not democracy in the modern sense. Do not make that mistake. It is a system with its own exclusions and its own brutalities and its own hierarchies of power that we will get to. But it is also, indisputably, a sophisticated political arrangement that distributes governance across a broad network of constituencies rather than concentrating it entirely in a single tyrant's hands. And it works. Mali, under the successors of Sundiata, becomes the dominant power in the Western Sudan. The gold fields of Bambuk and Bouré, in the basin between the Senegal and Niger rivers, pour their wealth into the imperial treasury. The trade routes expand and consolidate. Cities grow. Now, here is where we need to talk about something that your textbook definitely omitted. We need to talk about what those cities actually looked like, not in the vague, impressionistic way that historical documentaries sometimes describe ancient settlements, as if the important thing is simply that they existed, but in the specific, sensory, sometimes uncomfortable detail that allows you to actually understand what life inside them was like. Let us go to Djenné. It is perhaps the oldest continuously inhabited city in sub-Saharan Africa, predating the Mali Empire by over a millennium. By the time Mali reaches its peak, Djenné is already old. Its walls are made of cylindrical mud bricks, fired in kilns and assembled by craftsmen whose families have been doing this work for generations. The architecture is not primitive. It is sophisticated and perfectly adapted to the environment, thick walls that absorb the daytime heat and release it slowly through the cool nights, interior courtyards that trap shade, roof terraces that catch the evening breeze. But walk through its streets at midday in the dry season, and you will also confront realities that no romantic account can soften. The smell is immediate and visceral. Tens of thousands of people living in close quarters without modern sanitation produce waste in volumes that the most carefully designed drainage channels cannot entirely manage. Dead animals, donkeys, goats, cattle that have died of disease or age or slaughter, decompose in the alleys and along the riverbanks with a speed and completeness that the heat accelerates, and the flies accompany, and the vultures attend to with their particular efficiency. The river itself, the great Niger that makes all of this possible, carries in its water a rotating cast of parasites, schistosomiasis, guinea worm, river blindness, that take their toll on every human body that comes into sustained contact with it. Children die in numbers that no modern person is psychologically equipped to contemplate. In a city like Djenné, in this period, perhaps a quarter of all children born will not survive to see their 5th birthday. They die of dysentery, of malaria, of respiratory infections that their immune systems cannot fight. They die of accidents, from falling into the river, from the burns that open fires in crowded compounds produce with murderous frequency, from the snake bites that are an ordinary hazard of sleeping on ground-level floors. They die of simple malnutrition in the years when the rains fail and the harvest comes in short, and the stored grain from previous years has been depleted. We dwell on this not to diminish what these civilizations achieved. We dwell on it because the truth of ancient history is always more human than the abstraction we make of it. These were not symbols or metaphors or examples in a historical argument. They were people. People who were afraid of losing their children, who were afraid of drought, who were afraid of the fever that arrived with the summer rains and took 3 out of 10 people in a bad season. People who were also, at the same time, in the same bodies, in the same streets, creating works of theological scholarship, systems of commercial law, architectural traditions, and musical traditions, and oral literary traditions of extraordinary sophistication. The capacity of human beings to build beauty in the presence of suffering is the most important thing history teaches us. And nowhere is this more evident than in the city that has become, perhaps, the most famous name in the story of ancient Africa, Timbuktu. The name itself is a kind of myth now. In European languages, for centuries, Timbuktu meant somewhere impossibly remote, the edge of the known world, the place beyond all places. From here to Timbuktu. The phrase embedded in English is a synonym for incomprehensible distance. But here is what Timbuktu actually was at its height in the 14th and 15th centuries, when the Mali Empire gave way to the Songhai Empire and Timbuktu reached the apex of its influence. It was one of the greatest centers of learning in the world, not one of the greatest in Africa, one of the greatest in the world, full stop. At its peak, Timbuktu has a population estimated at somewhere between 50 and 100,000 people, a major metropolitan center by any medieval standard, and an extraordinary proportion of those people are engaged, in one way or another, with the production, transmission, and consumption of knowledge. The Sankor Mosque complex, the institution at the heart of Timbuktu's intellectual life, is not merely a place of worship. It is a university. Students come to it from across the Islamic world, from the Maghreb and from Egypt, from Andalusia and from the Arabian Peninsula. They come because the scholars of Timbuktu are recognized in the academic networks of the medieval Islamic world as authorities in fields ranging from Islamic jurisprudence to mathematics, from astronomy to history, from medicine to Quranic interpretation. At its height, scholars estimate, Timbuktu has approximately 25,000 students. In a city of perhaps 100,000 people, that is 1 in 4. The ratio of scholars and students to general population in Timbuktu at its peak is comparable to modern university towns, Oxford, Cambridge, Berkeley. Think about what that means for the intellectual atmosphere of the place. Think about the conversations being had in its cafes and markets, in its homes and its mosque courtyards, and then consider what those scholars were producing. Because this is where the story takes its most startling turn. There are, today, somewhere between 300,000 and 1 million manuscripts in private collections in Timbuktu and across the broader Sahel region. 300,000 to 1 million. The range is so vast because many of them have never been cataloged, never been digitized, never been studied by outside scholars. They sit in family libraries, in chests buried in the sand during times of conflict, in rooms sealed against the Harmattan wind that desiccates paper and memory alike. The manuscripts that have been studied reveal a world of intellectual life, of stunning breadth and sophistication. There are treatises on mathematics, on astronomy, on political philosophy, on music theory, on medicine, including detailed pharmacological texts describing the preparation and application of hundreds of plant and mineral compounds, some of which modern pharmacologists have found to contain medically active ingredients. There are books of poetry, books of history. Some of the most important primary sources we have for the history of the Western Sudan are Timbuktu manuscripts, written by scholars who were eyewitnesses or near contemporaries of the events they describe. There are books of Islamic law so nuanced in their reasoning, so deeply engaged with the specific social and political realities of West African life, that they constitute an entirely independent intellectual tradition within the broader world of Islamic jurisprudence. One of the most important of these historians is Ahmad ibn Muhammad Baba al-Masufi al-Timbukti, Ahmad Baba, as he is generally known, who lives from 1556 to 1627 and is perhaps the single most prolific and widely recognized scholar Timbuktu ever produced. He writes more than 40 books on subjects ranging from biography to Islamic law to astronomy. He owns a personal library of more than 1,600 volumes, and he considers this a modest collection, once remarking that his library was the smallest of his scholarly acquaintances. Think about that. The smallest private library among his circle of friends, contained more than 1,600 books. This is not the European Middle Ages, where books are so rare and precious that a monastery might possess a few dozen. This is a culture of books, a culture that values scholarship so highly that a scholar's personal library is a marker of social status, that children are educated as a matter of course, that the production and reproduction of manuscripts is an industry employing hundreds of copyists, binders, and illuminators. If you are surprised by this, if this conflicts with the image of Africa that you absorbed, however unconsciously, from the education you received, then I want you to sit with that surprise. I want you to feel it. Because that discomfort, that cognitive friction between what you expected and what the evidence shows, is one of the most important feelings a student of history can have. It is the feeling of your understanding of the world correcting itself. Stay with us, because we are not even close to finished. The Songhai Empire, which succeeds Mali as the dominant power of the Western Sudan in the late 15th century, reaches its greatest extent under two rulers whose careers are among the most dramatic in all of African history. The first is Sunni Ali Ber. The second is Askia Muhammad, and between them, they embody a tension between the old African religious traditions and the new Islamic cosmopolitanism, between military conquest and administrative sophistication, between raw power and legitimate governance, that tells us something essential about what empire actually is. Sunni Ali Ber comes to power in 1464. He is a military genius of the first order, impatient, brutal, creative, and possessed of an energy that his contemporaries describe in terms that edge toward the supernatural. He campaigns almost constantly for nearly 3 decades, expanding Songhai from a significant regional power into the largest state in the history of West Africa. His methods are not gentle. The contemporary chronicles, which are, it should be noted, written by scholars in Timbuktu who have personal reasons to despise him, so some discount must be applied, describe him as a man of ferocious temper who executes perceived enemies without restraint, who is capable of extraordinary cruelty to those he considers obstacles, who burns and pillages cities that resist him, and who has a complicated, turbulent, and frequently violent relationship with the scholarly establishment of Timbuktu, which he suspects, not always wrongly, of working against his interests. The chronicles describe, in terms that are hard to read, scenes of violence in Timbuktu during his occupation of the city. Scholars humiliated, driven out, imprisoned. Al-Sadi, writing in the 17th century in his chronicle Tariq al-Sudan, preserves accounts of Sunni Ali's soldiers doing things to the population of Timbuktu that make the pages uncomfortable to hold. He is, in the language of these sources, a tyrant, an oppressor, a man whose personal religious practice is considered heterodox by the Orthodox Muslim scholars who dominate Timbuktu's intellectual culture. But here's the complication. Because Sunni Ali is also the man who builds the infrastructure of the Songhai state, he constructs an irrigation system in the Niger inland delta that significantly expands agricultural production. He creates a professional imperial navy on the Niger River that gives Songhai a military capacity no landlocked rival can match. He establishes a sophisticated administrative system divided into provinces, each governed by an appointed official responsible to the central government, which is one of the first such systems of bureaucratic governance in the region's history. He is a monster and a builder, as many of history's great empire builders are. When he dies in 1492, the same year, as it happens, that Columbus makes his famous crossing of the Atlantic, his son succeeds him, but holds power only briefly. A coup brings Askia Muhammad to the throne, and with him comes the other face of Songhai. Where Sunni Ali was a soldier king, Askia Muhammad is something rarer, a soldier king who is also a genuine intellectual and administrator. He performs his own Hajj to Mecca, deliberately echoing Mansa Musa, and not accidentally, since the political symbolism of the gesture was well understood, and returns with a renewed commitment to Islamic law and a network of scholarly contacts across the Muslim world. He invites scholars to his court. He consults with jurists before making major legal decisions. He funds the mosque complex at Gao, Songhai's capital, and the scholarly institutions that give it cultural legitimacy. Under Askia Muhammad, Timbuktu reaches the peak that we have been describing. Those 25,000 students, those hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, that cosmopolitan intellectual culture that draws scholars from across the Islamic world. The city under his patronage is a place where a student from North Africa might spend a decade studying Islamic jurisprudence and return home with credentials recognized in Cairo and in Baghdad. Where a mathematician might publish work on lunar cycles that would be read in Andalusia and in Persia. Where a physician might consult texts translated from Greek through Arabic and synthesize them with local botanical knowledge into something genuinely new. And beneath all of this, beneath the scholarship and the gold and the great mosques and the scholarly debates, the trade network that makes everything possible keeps humming. The caravans keep crossing the Sahara, thousands of camels moving in columns that stretch for miles, crossing the Arg and the Reg, the sand seas and the rock plains, guided by stars and by the accumulated geographic knowledge of generations of Tuareg and Amazigh and Hausa traders who know every water source, every well, every outcropping that can provide shade, every route that is passable, and every route that is not. The mortality on these caravans is something the trade ledgers do not record, but the bones in the sand do. Crossing the Sahara in this period is a journey of genuine peril. A camel that goes lame in the wrong place is a death sentence. A sandstorm that disorients the guide by half a day's travel can push a caravan off course by enough to miss the next water source. And in the desert, missing the next water source by 20 miles is not an inconvenience, it is a catastrophe. The skeletons of camels and of people both have been found by archaeologists and by the herders of later centuries, still arranged in the positions of collapse in the open desert, far from any road. The people who died out there, anonymous, unmourned by anyone who wrote things down, buried by the wind and the indifferent sand, were the human cost of the prosperity that built the Mali and Songhai empires. They were the porters and the servants and the enslaved people being transported north, and they were also the free, merchants and the guides and the soldiers assigned to escort duty. And they were the camels themselves, those extraordinary animals without which none of this would have been possible, and whose suffering, whose tremendous unglamorous biological suffering under loads that were sometimes too heavy and in conditions that were always extreme, also deserves a moment of recognition. Because this is the reality of all great historical achievement. Behind the manuscripts and the gold and the great rulers and the architectural wonders, there are always the people and the animals whose labor and whose lives made the achievement possible. And their story is as much a part of the history as the story of the kings. Now we must talk about something that every honest account of these empires has to address, and that some accounts find it convenient to minimize or omit. We must talk about slavery. The trans-Saharan slave trade is ancient. It predates Islam, though Islam's expansion significantly intensifies and formalizes it. And the major West African empires, Ghana, Mali, Songhai, are not merely victims of this trade. They are also, to varying degrees, active participants in it. Enslaved people are a component of the tribute systems that hold these empires together. Military campaigns generate enslaved prisoners of war. The great rulers, including Mansa Musa, including Askia Muhammad, own enslaved people personally and in vast numbers. This is not a comfortable fact. It is also not a simple one. Slavery in the context of these empires is not identical to the transatlantic chattel slavery that will devastate West Africa beginning in the 16th century. This is important to understand, not as an excuse, but as a matter of historical accuracy. In the Islamic legal framework that governs most of these empires by the 14th and 15th centuries, enslaved people have certain legal protections, the right not to be killed arbitrarily, some pathways to manumission, legal personhood in a limited but real sense. Enslaved people can, in this context, accumulate wealth, hold positions of significant responsibility, and in some cases, effectively govern on behalf of their owners. There are Songhai military commanders who are technically enslaved, but who exercise more actual power than many free men. None of this makes slavery acceptable. None of it mitigates the fundamental violence of the institution, the coercion, the rupture from family and community, the profound dehumanization of being reduced to a commodity. A person being marched across the Sahara in chains, away from everyone they have ever loved, toward a life of enforced labor in a country whose language they do not speak. That person's suffering is not diminished by the legal technicalities of the system that has taken them. But the full truth of the institution, including its internal complexity, matters for the same reason that all historical truths matter. Because understanding the past in its actual complexity, rather than in the simplified versions we prefer, is the only way to understand how we arrived at the present. And this matters particularly because the transatlantic slave trade, the catastrophe that begins in the late 15th century and expands through the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, will target precisely these civilizations. It will drain West Africa of an estimated 12 to 15 million people over roughly 4 centuries. It will systematically disrupt the political and economic structures that have allowed the great empires to function. It will create internal conflicts as African rulers and merchants are drawn into the trade as suppliers, making choices of terrible complicity and terrible pragmatism, choices that still cast shadows over the region today. And it will be followed by European colonialism, which will write the history of Africa in ways designed to justify itself, ways that will tell the people of the 20th and 21st centuries that Africa had no real history worth knowing, no real civilizations worth studying, no achievements that could possibly qualify as significant contributions to human progress. That story, the story of the deliberate historical erasure, is a history in itself, and it is as important as the history of the empires it erased. But that story belongs to a different era, and our focus here is on the empires themselves, on what they built and what they were before the world they knew came apart. So let us return to Timbuktu. Let us return to the 15th century, when the city is at its peak, when Askia Muhammad's patronage has made it the intellectual center of a civilization that stretches from the Atlantic coast to the bend of the Niger. Let us walk into the Sankor Mosque at the moment of the afternoon prayer, when the muezzin's call echoes off the mud brick walls and the scholars close their manuscripts and the students lay down their reed pens and everyone turns toward Mecca in the posture of submission, that is, at its best, also a posture of humility before something larger than the self. The mosque is not like the great stone mosques of Cairo or the marble palaces of Istanbul. It is built of mud brick and timber, of the materials that the Sahel provides, shaped by the hands of craftsmen whose aesthetic vocabulary is entirely indigenous. The towers are studded with the projecting wooden beams that serve both as scaffolding for the annual replastering. The mosque's walls must be replastered every year after the rains, a ceremony of collective maintenance that the whole community participates in. And as a visual signature, as distinctive as any architectural style in the world. This is the great Sudanese architecture, and it is magnificent. It is not what you expect when someone says medieval university, but it is exactly what it is. In the rooms surrounding the mosque's courtyard, the lectures are happening. A senior scholar sits on a mat surrounded by students in a circle, reading from a manuscript and commenting as he reads. The classical Islamic pedagogical method, unchanged across centuries. The manuscript he is reading may be a legal text, tracing a chain of reasoning about property law or inheritance that stretches back through generations of scholars, each adding his own commentary, each argument building on and sometimes overturning those before it. Or it may be a text on astronomy, the movements of Jupiter and its conjunction with Saturn, its implications for agricultural calendars, the mathematical calculations required to predict the position of the moon, or a text on medicine describing the symptoms and treatment of the diseases that move through the city with the seasonal rains. Outside, in the market that surrounds the mosque on 3 sides, the same commercial energy that fills every great medieval city creates its own kind of music. Vendors call out the prices of cola nuts and salt and dried fish. Metalworkers hammer. Dyers pull bolts of indigo-soaked cloth from their vats, the blue staining their hands and forearms up to the elbow in a color so deep it seems almost black, and the cloth billows in the wind and catches the light in ways that make the whole market seem, for a moment, lit from within. Gold does not move openly in the market. The gold trade operates through brokers, through weighing systems of careful calibration, through the credit networks that connect Timbuktu's merchants to partners in Cairo and Fez and Lisbon. The actual metal is secured, weighed in private, transported under guard. But its presence permeates everything, in the quality of the goods on sale, in the scale of the transactions being negotiated, in the ambitions of the merchants who crowd the shade of the mosque's exterior walls at the end of the trading day to exchange news and rumors, and the intelligence that drives commercial decisions. This is a city of information as much as of goods, because the great merchants of Timbuktu understand something that the best traders in every era have understood. That information is the most valuable commodity of all. A merchant who knows that the gold market in Cairo is about to tighten because a new source of Sudanese gold has opened up, or because the Mamluk Sultan has imposed a new tax on imports, can position himself advantageously weeks before his competitors become aware of the change. The caravan system is also an intelligence network, and the scholars who move along the same routes as the merchants, stopping at the same caravanserais and drinking at the same wells, are some of its most valuable nodes. What moves between Timbuktu and the Mediterranean world in this period is not just gold and salt and enslaved people. It is also books and letters and the news of political developments and theological debates and mathematical innovations and legal opinions requested by distant jurists on questions specific to the West African context. What is the proper Islamic ruling on a ruler who converts to Islam but whose subjects have not? What obligations does a Muslim merchant have toward a non-Muslim trading partner? What are the limits of a ruler's legitimate authority under Islamic law? And the answers that come back, engaging seriously with the specific realities of life in the Western Sudan, creating a body of Islamic scholarship that is Malian and Songhai and fully Muslim at the same time, without contradiction. This intellectual exchange, this conversation between the scholars of West Africa and the scholars of the broader Islamic world, is one of the most important and least known facts of medieval intellectual history. Because it means that Timbuktu is not an isolated wonder, a local accident of genius, flowering improbably in the desert. It is a node in a network, a participant in a global conversation, a civilization in dialogue with other civilizations, contributing to them as much as receiving them. And this is precisely what the dominant historical narratives of the 19th and 20th centuries could not accommodate. Because the story those narratives needed to tell, the story that justified the European colonial project and the global racial hierarchy that slavery had created, required Africa to be something specific. It required Africa to be passive, isolated, primitive, outside of history rather than inside it. The existence of Timbuktu, of the Mali and Songhai empires, of the manuscript libraries and the universities and the trade networks, was not simply an inconvenience to that narrative. It was a refutation of it, a direct, documentary, archaeological refutation. And so it was managed, not always through outright denial, though outright denial happened. There are 19th century European scholars who genuinely argued that the great ruins and achievements of sub-Saharan Africa must have been built by non-African peoples, because Africans, in their racial framework, were incapable of such things. More often, the management was subtler. Through omission, through framing, through the consistent relegation of African history to a special bounded category separate from the world history that everyone else was part of. Africa became a place that had no history until Europeans arrived, or had only a local history of no global significance, or had history that was simply not worth the amount of curriculum time that European history received. The result is the gap we began with, the gap that exists in the education of billions of people alive today, the gap that allows the phrase "from here to Timbuktu" to mean somewhere impossibly remote, when the historical truth is that Timbuktu was, for a significant period, one of the most cosmopolitan and intellectually vibrant cities in the world. We are filling in that gap today. We are doing it because the truth matters, not as a political statement, not as a corrective grievance, but simply as the truth. History happened. These civilizations existed. These people lived and thought and built and argued and prayed and died. They deserve to be known on their own terms, in their full complexity, without the filters of later centuries' political needs. If this story is reaching you, if any part of what we have covered today is news to you, we want to know. Tell us in the comments what surprised you most, because your engagement matters. It tells us that these stories are worth telling, and it helps more people find them. Now let us talk about what the collapse of Songhai looked like, because empires end, and the way they end is often as revealing as the way they rise. The Moroccan invasion of 1591 is one of the most dramatic military events in the history of West Africa, and one of the least known. Sultan Ahmad al-Mansur of Morocco sends an army south across the Sahara, led by a general named Juder Pasha. The army numbers perhaps 4,000 men, which sounds modest until you understand what it carries: arquebuses, firearms, the technology that is, at this precise historical moment, transforming warfare across the Eurasian world, giving small disciplined forces equipped with gunpowder weapons the capacity to shatter much larger armies equipped with conventional weapons. The crossing of the Sahara by Juder Pasha's army is itself an achievement of terrifying cost. The desert kills men every day of the march: disease, thirst, heat. The army that arrives on the banks of the Niger is significantly smaller than the one that left Morocco. The men are exhausted and sick, but they have their guns. At the Battle of Tondibi, they meet the Songhai army. The Songhai Emperor Askia Ishak II deploys cattle as a weapon, a herd driven toward the Moroccan lines to disorder them before the Songhai cavalry charge. It is a tactic with deep roots in the military traditions of the Sudan. Against conventional opponents, it might well have worked. Against arquebuses, it produces a different result. The cattle, panicked by the sound of the guns, turn and stampede back through the Songhai lines, breaking the formation before the battle has properly begun. The massacre that follows is devastating. Songhai's military capacity is shattered. Juder Pasha takes Timbuktu and Gao. And what happens next is one of the most heartbreaking chapters in the cultural history of West Africa. The Moroccan occupiers, uncertain about the loyalties of the scholarly establishment and, not entirely wrongly, suspicious that the scholars' networks could support resistance movements, decide to remove the most prominent scholars of Timbuktu. Ahmad Baba, the great scholar we mentioned earlier, is arrested. Dozens of his colleagues are arrested with him. They are marched north across the Sahara. Scholars, men in their 50s and 60s, men who have never walked further than between the mosque and the library, in chains. Many do not survive the crossing. Ahmad Baba survives. He is imprisoned in Marrakech for 2 years, then released under restrictions that amount to a form of house arrest. He continues to write. He continues to teach. Students seek him out even in Marrakech, because his reputation is such that even in captivity, he is recognized as one of the greatest scholars of his generation. He writes about his arrest, about the confiscation of his library, about the 1,600 books he has lost in terms of grief so specific and so personal that you understand, reading them, that for a man like Ahmad Baba, losing his library is something close to losing himself. He eventually returns to Timbuktu, but the city he returns to is not the city he was taken from. The Moroccan occupation has disrupted the trade networks. The caravan routes that fed Timbuktu's economy and its intellectual life have shifted. The student population has declined. The great days of Sankor, when 25,000 students debated jurisprudence and astronomy in the shadow of the mosque, are over. They will not return. What survives is the manuscripts. Thousands and thousands of manuscripts, preserved in the private libraries of the scholarly families, hidden in walls and buried in sand, and carried on the backs of donkeys to villages far from the main roads when soldiers came near. These families, the Qadi family, the Akit family, and many others, understand that what they hold is irreplaceable. They do not always know exactly what they have. In many cases, they have not read everything in their family's collection, but they know that it is sacred, that it must be kept, and so they keep it. Through the Moroccan occupation and its aftermath, through the rise and fall of smaller successor states, through the Fulani jihads of the 18th and 19th centuries, through the French colonial occupation of the 19th and 20th centuries, through the civil conflicts of the post-independence period. Generation after generation, these families maintain the manuscripts, repair them when they deteriorate, copy them when the originals become too fragile to handle. They maintain them not for scholars or for governments or for museums, but because it is what their families do. Because the knowledge must survive. When the Mali government, working with international partners, begins the systematic project of cataloging and digitizing these manuscripts in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, what they find staggers everyone involved. The scope of the collection, the range of subjects covered, the sophistication of the arguments made. Scholars who have devoted their careers to the study of Islamic intellectual history find texts in Timbuktu that they have never encountered in any other archive. Medical texts, mathematical texts, texts on logic and on ethics, poetry of haunting beauty, and practical texts, guides to agriculture, to commercial law, to the management of disputes within communities that tell us, in the most granular possible detail, how daily life was actually organized in these cities and empires. The digitization project is ongoing. It is painstaking and expensive, and frequently frustrated by the instability of the region. In 2012, when jihadist militias occupied Timbuktu, a desperate operation smuggled tens of thousands of manuscripts out of the city in footlockers and shipping containers, carried by boat down the Niger River to safety in Bamako. The people who organized this operation, local scholars, librarians, descendants of the families who had kept the manuscripts for centuries, risked their lives to do it. And they succeeded. Most of the manuscripts were saved. Let that image settle for a moment. In the 21st century, people risked their lives to save manuscripts written in the 15th and 16th centuries. Documents that the world has been told for generations did not exist, evidence that Africa had no written history worth preserving. Think about the depth of that irony. Feel the full weight of it. Now, let us pull back and let us look at what all of this means, not in abstract political terms, but in the specific, concrete terms of what we now know. We know that the Mali Empire at its height in the 14th century was the largest empire on earth by some measures, a claim that can be contested and qualified, but that is not simply propaganda. We know that its ruler, Mansa Musa, was by most modern analyses the wealthiest individual in the history of the world in terms of real wealth relative to the economy of his time, richer, in this comparative sense, than any Roman emperor, any medieval European king, any modern billionaire. We know that the city of Timbuktu, at its peak under Songhai, was home to a university with 25,000 students and a library tradition that produced between 300,000 and 1 million surviving manuscripts. We know that the scholars of this tradition were engaged in active intellectual exchange with scholars across the Islamic world, contributing to global conversations about law, science, mathematics, and philosophy. We know that the iron smelting technology of sub-Saharan Africa, in at least some regions, predates the same technology in Europe. We know all of this, and yet almost none of it appears in the standard curricula of the countries that colonized Africa. Almost none of it appears in the popular historical narratives of the countries that built their wealth, in part, on the trade networks and the slave trade that ultimately dismantled these civilizations. Why? The answer to that question is a long one, and it is uncomfortable, and it is itself a history that deserves its own full treatment. But at its core, the answer is because knowing this history requires a renegotiation of the stories that powerful societies tell about themselves. Because the standard narrative of human progress, the one that places certain civilizations at the center as the primary agents of history and others at the periphery as passive recipients of civilization, cannot survive an honest confrontation with what actually happened in West Africa between the 10th and the 17th centuries. That renegotiation is not a loss, it is a gain. Understanding the past more accurately in its full complexity does not diminish anyone's history. It enriches everyone's understanding of what human beings are capable of. It expands the frame, It adds names and stories and ideas to the shared human inheritance that belong there, that have always belonged there, and that have been missing. And missing stories have costs. They have costs for the people whose ancestors' achievements are erased or minimized, who grow up with an impoverished sense of what their heritage contains. But they also have costs for everyone else, because a historical understanding built on omissions and distortions is not just unjust, it is simply inaccurate. It is a map with the wrong geography, and navigating the present with a map that omits entire continents is a form of disorientation that has consequences for everyone. The manuscripts of Timbuktu are being digitized. The ruins of Jene have been excavated. The chronicles of Ahmad Baba and Al-Sadi and Mahmud Qadi and Ibn Battuta, who visited the Mali Empire in the 1350s and left a description of stunning detail and astonishment, have been translated and studied. The scholarship is there. The evidence is there. The story has always been there, waiting to be told honestly. What we are doing, in stories like this one, is simply pointing at it, saying, look at what was here. Look at the scale of it. Look at the sophistication and the complexity and the humanity of it. Look at the libraries and the mosques and the trade networks and the legal treatises and the architectural traditions and the agricultural systems and the political institutions and the caravan routes across the desert and the people who died on those routes and the people who lived in the cities those routes fed, and the scholars who sat in those cities and wrote about the stars and about God and about justice and about the proper treatment of the poor, and understand that all of this is world history. Not African history in some separate, bounded regional sense. World history. The history of the human project, in which this civilization was a central and irreplaceable participant. If you are still here, and if you have watched this far, then you are exactly the kind of person this story was made for. Then we want to ask you something. We want to ask you to think about what the word history means to you after watching this. Think about whose stories are in that word, and whose stories are missing, and what the world might look like if the missing stories were told as completely and as carefully as the stories we already know. We cannot undo the centuries of omission. We cannot restore the libraries that were ransacked, or the trade networks that were disrupted, or the political structures that were dismantled. But we can tell the truth. We can say clearly and without qualification that the civilization of ancient West Africa, the empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, the city of Timbuktu, the scholars of Sankore, the merchants of the trans-Saharan trade, the farmers of the Niger inland delta, the iron workers and the architects and the judges and the poets, was a civilization of the first rank by any honest measure, in any honest comparison, using any honest metric. This is the truth about ancient Africa that your textbook did not tell you, not because it was unknown, not because the evidence did not exist, but because the evidence was there, and the people with the power to decide what got taught and what did not decided that this particular truth was too inconvenient to include. Their decision was wrong. And the correction of that decision starts here. In stories like this one, in the conversations that follow, in the curiosity that makes you want to know more, to dig deeper, to follow the thread of this history further than we have had time to take it today. Like this story if it changed something in how you understand the world. Share it with someone who has never heard the name Mansa Musa or walked through the libraries of Timbuktu in their imagination. Subscribe, because we are just getting started, and the stories we have left to tell are as extraordinary as this one. And leave us a comment. Tell us what hit hardest. Tell us what you want to know next, because this conversation is not finished. History is always longer than the account of it. The world is always larger than the map, and the truth, the full, complicated, vivid human truth, is always worth more than the comfortable story. The manuscripts are waiting. Mansa Musa's gold is somewhere still in the foundations of medieval Cairo. Ahmad Baba's books, the ones that survived his chains and the desert crossing and the centuries of neglect and the soldiers of 2012, those books are in archives right now, being read by scholars who cannot quite believe what they are seeing. And somewhere beneath the harmattan dust of the Western Sahara, in the sand that has swallowed the bones of camels and merchants and scholars and soldiers and kings, the rest of the story waits, patient as the desert itself, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. We are asking them now. Join us.